So today in the Foster podcast, we are welcoming Kendall Baker of Axios Sports. For those that are not aware with his work, Kendall Baker is the go-to source, personally for me and for many others, for sports information. Last I saw, there's over 500,000 subscribers to the Axios Sports newsletter that are getting his email on the weekday. He started writing a newsletter in 2017. It was formerly known as Sports Internet, which was then acquired by the great website Axios in 2019. Before that, Kendall was a columnist at Bleacher Report, worked a little at production at ESPN, and was the head of content at The Hustle. Fun fact that I read on here is that Kendall helped The Hustle pivot from the existing business model to a newsletter model that still exists to this point. Throughout this, he found his passion for sports and creating, he turned to a successful business. So today we want to talk about what his background has been, how he got into writing, the business of the newsletter, and then a little bit about sports overall. Welcome, Kendall.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Just for your work, Kendall, here at Foster, we're a community of writers who contribute to each other's work. So we help each other through editing and publishing content to increase overall the online content and publishing at that. One thing I want to open up is walk us through your personal story on how you got into writing and what led you to Axios Sports. We'll give you a little bit of intro, but I'm sure there's some other stuff that you can add some color to.
No. So, I mean, in terms of writing, I obviously started out in sports writing. That was my first job out of school. And I think there's something about sports writing in particular that, I know I've talked to some people and connected with them about, whether it's sports writing or just the sports world in general. It's one of those career paths that a lot of people right out of school maybe are like, you have to kind of convince yourself that it's serious, because in some ways you're like, well, doesn't everybody just want to work in sports? Am I just taking the easy way out? Am I just, thinking too much about what's going to be fun versus like what's quote unquote serious? So that was just kind of an interesting kind of hurdle to get over. I just remember early on in my career was like, is this a serious career essentially? Because it seems too fun. And it ended up working out, of course. So yeah, I started in sports writing. Actually, my first job out of school involved a lot of actually learning. I worked at Bleacher Report, and they had basically like a program at the time to teach you how to be a sports writer. It was in their format, which at the time was kind of funny, a lot of listicles. So I've kind of shed those learnings. But yeah, so I started out at Bleacher Report, and pretty early on, I realized I was super interested, obviously, in sports writing, but also from like a entrepreneurial perspective, I was really interested in the idea of like starting a sports media company. And I think that is kind of the story of my career, which is starting out in sports writing, developing those skills, realizing I had a passion for it, and then also realizing I wanted to build something that whether it was me writing or somebody else writing, I wanted to build a sports media company. And that's kind of where my journey took me in terms of staying in media, getting out of sports media, going to The Hustle, which covered not sports, it was tech, entrepreneurship, things like that. And just really learning how to build media products and build audiences and just continually getting better at writing along the way.
Awesome. One thing that I saw in my research, and it's funny, you mentioned one time what the worst advice I was giving to you, and you mentioned that don't be a multi-sport athlete. You mentioned that in high school you were a lacrosse, soccer, and basketball player, and you kept to that. Walk us through like that background on sports, how that influenced you writing on it, because like you mentioned, it's something that you like to do, you participated in sports, but maybe the jump from action to writing, in writing in a compelling way, it's not as easy. Is there any models that you had of how you wanted to write, who you were looking up to in that sense that can help us understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think sports for a lot of people, there's two ways that it kind of influences you from an early age. One, obviously, is playing the sport. So you have, a ton of great memories playing youth soccer. My dad was the coach. My best friends were on the team, right? That kind of instills a love in sports. Also, at the same time, I was a fan of sports. So, so much of what my friends and I talked about on the weekends growing up in like high school was like, what's happening in the NBA, what's happening in the NFL, playing fantasy. So whether it's sports fandom or actually being an athlete, I think both kind of combine to give me a love of sports from many different perspectives. I like I like talking about sports. I like playing them. And so that combination just made me super passionate. And one unique thing I think, maybe not unique, but different about my sports fandom in particular growing up was, for whatever reason, I didn't really have many teams that I was kind of a loyal fan of. I was more a fan of everything. Like I'm a diehard Orioles fan. That's like the one team I'm a diehard fan of, and I think that's kind of how you have to follow baseball. You have your team. Not many people follow like the league as a whole. But for everything else, I just followed the NBA. I love the NBA. Watch any teams. NFL. I think for a lot of people now with fantasy, it's like you just kind of watch all the games. You're following all the storylines, and so I think that actually, growing up and following sports that way, prepared me to be a sports writer, because it's basically now what I do. And I follow everything, and I can kind of talk about anything and have a very diverse kind of interest and knowledge background that informs my writing now. And to answer your last part, what influences, I'd probably say, and it's funny, he doesn't really write too much anymore, more podcasting now, but Bill Simmons was probably one of the first people that to me was like, that seems like my dream job. I was in glory days of blogging. In many ways, I kind of think what I do now with the newsletter is like the modern day version of blogging. Instead of writing a blog and people coming to that website, you just send them your blog. That's basically what a newsletter is, right? So yeah, I'd probably say Bill Simmons was the first person I can remember as like probably a 14-year-old being like, that seems like a cool job. Or like Rick Riley had his column in the back of Sports Illustrated. There's a few people growing up that it was just like, whether I liked them from a writing style or anything, it was just like, that seems like a fun job, and kind of put it into my mind like, wow, if I could figure out how to have that career, that seems pretty sweet. So.
Okay, that's really good to know. Now everyone's writing newsletters. Now there's different companies, Substack, Review, Facebook just came up with one. Overall, it's not something that was popular back in the day, even in 2017. I know that people are saying newsletters coming back, but now it's like the fashion thing to do. One thing that I want to know is like something that you know now that you write a newsletter that you wish you knew earlier. Something that's helpful to understand. I'm sure when you make the change from like, okay, I'm leaving ESPN or I'm leaving the hustle to do my own thing, you had a lot of like detectives be like, what are you going to do? This is a newsletter business. That doesn't make sense. Did you have those? But something that you know now that you wish you can go back then and explain why you made this?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think maybe one thing that I will say, and this was whether specific to newsletters, but also just kind of anybody starting a media business of any sort, or just whether it's a business or not, just creating content, is, and it's not that I didn't know this, it just cannot be it cannot be reiterated enough, which is particularly when it comes to media and content creation, like focus is key. I think a lot of people spread themselves too thin and try to do everything. And I remember in my early days starting Sports Internet, I did the newsletter, but I was also like, all right, well, I should also be, on social. Maybe I should do a podcast. Maybe I should do this. And I kind of tried all those things, and ultimately ended up being like, this newsletter is what is how you're making your name. This newsletter is how you're making money. Let's just lean into that. And I think that ended up working out really well for me, because I was able to focus on one thing, put all my resources into that, and that was essentially what got acquired by Axios. And so I just think it's one of those things that I kind of knew at the time, but even if I could go back, I'd remind myself even more frequently, just focus. I think, it's just particularly again in media, because it's so easy to start something, people start everything, and they end up looking unfocused. And one thing I remember thinking was, when I was writing the newsletter, it was just me, there's only so many hours in the day. Do I want to invest time in social media? Okay, if I do that, if I have this Twitter account, Instagram page, for all these things for my newsletter, like what am I really realistically going to be able to do there? And I've always thought, if somebody goes to your Instagram page or Twitter page and has like 200 followers, that's way worse than if you just don't have one. Because then people can assume, well, maybe they would have 10,000, and it's almost better to be mysterious than to be not great. And I think that's a good lesson. Like, if you're not going to be the best at something, why even put it out there for people to have takeaways about. So focus is everything, I think.
Well, yeah, for a focus, and I think you view your job number one as to organize the content information for sports fans or sports related fans to get it on there. So one thing that I wanted to follow up on the focus, it's interesting you mentioned Simmons and Riley. These are huge writers, but they write like 2,000, 3,000 word columns. And then on the other side was listicles, so you have a Bleacher Report. And then right in the middle, it's Axios, which is like clear, concise, to the point, use for your words, and make sure you trust the audience to understand what you're looking at. So can you walk us through, like, you follow Simmons, or you wanted to be like Simmons, or Simmons was an idol of Riley, and then having the focus, you wanted to synthesize that in a way that is more digestible for the audience. Can you walk us through that conversion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the most interesting part of my writing journey, is just kind of developing this writing style, which I had developed before I came to Axios, and Axios was just like even more of it, which is just, like, I am upset. I'm at this point obsessed with efficiency. Like, I take pride in deleting words. Like, when I can make a paragraph on my computer screen look a line shorter, I'm like, yes. Like, it's like weird how obsessed I am with like making things shorter. But I think it all started when I started at the Hustle with a newsletter. I think the newsletter medium kind of forces you to be concise, because particularly when you think about people reading on their phones, which a lot of people are, there's something about being able to see the bottom of that. Like, if you're reading a chunk of text and you can see where it ends, you're more likely to keep going. You think about people's attention spans these days, if they can't see the end, they're bailing, honestly. It's really sad, but that's kind of the reality. And I think that's what I respect so much about Axios, is instead of ignoring that reality, because it is kind of a depressing one, right? It's depressing to admit that human beings can't read 300 words without getting bored and going back to Twitter. But it's real to a certain extent, and Axios kind of leans into that. And so I think I started at the Hustle getting really into just editing, right? And almost like my job still to this day, like, I write a lot, but I feel like I spend almost more time editing myself, and treat that process of going back through what I think is already, a B+ and making it an A. Like, that's what I really enjoy doing. And so, yeah, I think it started from out of necessity of writing newsletters and realizing we need to keep this under a certain amount of words. And that just kind of spilling over into how I write now. And a lot of times when I'm writing, I, in many ways, and sometimes, doing original reporting, of course, but a lot of other times it's basically, taking the news of the day and kind of trying to put that and package that in a way for my readers. And a lot of times I literally am viewing my job as like taking all this information and just distilling it down and organizing it in a way that I know a human being reading with their eyes can follow in a way that makes sense. And that's, why I believe so much in this format, because even just the visual of a chunk of text and then 2 bullets under that, the visual of that is you're seeing a higher level, and then there's a few details, and you're coming back out, higher level, few details. And that just, I personally think, allows that person's brain to really kind of go with that flow and not have to search for the nuggets of information in a larger article. That the nuggets, we're basically saying, here are the nuggets of information you would have found.
Great. One thing that I want to double click on this piece, because a lot of the thing that you do is organize awards, sports internet, for lack of a better phrase, and you do some reporting, but you also aggregate or content that you see on there. How do you balance that? What are your sources that you look for, and how do you rewrite it in a way that your audience understands in a shorter synthesis what you're trying to?
Yeah. Well, I think
that writing process.
Yeah. So I think, to answer the question, how do I do it? It's very much, an art, not a science. Some days it's much more heavy on original reporting, interviews, things like that. Other days it's very much, here's what happened. I mean, with sports, right, there's so many things happening at night. Like right now, this week, NBA Finals, Stanley Cup. Some days just could be like, here's the games that happened last night, right? Because that's what's important. Whereas during the pandemic, when there was months without any sports at all, it was a lot more reporting. We did a lot of like the business of college sports, because college sports all of a sudden shut down. And it was really interesting to kind of research, like, well, how much money does football make schools? And now that football might not be there. So it just really depends on the news cycle. And that's, kind of the deal with the daily newsletter. Some days, like I can't really plan too much ahead, because I'm very much responding to what happens. If somebody gets hurt tonight in the NBA, which they probably will at this rate, I'm going to have to, write about that. So it's definitely an art and a science. I do think about it. I think about the newsletter as a whole. And so maybe if we are getting too deep on recaps or, curation, I do want to inject an interview in there. I do want to inject something else to make it a little bit more diverse. So it's definitely an art and a science. But in terms of how I do it is probably my biggest secret sauce. And obviously this isn't applicable to many people because not many people's job is to distill an entire industry's worth of news every day. But how I do it is I built a custom RSS feed that has every publication you can imagine. It has subreddits, it has Twitter accounts. It's literally like every source of information that I have ever relied on is in one place, and it comes in linear feed. So it's like I can literally read everything that was published on the internet today in one sitting. And as I go through that, I'm pocketing certain things. I'm saying, well, I'm going to need that for later. That I don't need, I'll need that. And then I go back later and pull that stuff over and start organizing it. So I can almost read the news like somebody would read through their inbox. I'm almost like, here's a story. Is this interesting? Yeah, save it, or no, delete it. Is it? Oh, that's it. That's related to that story from yesterday. Let me move that over here so I link those two together. So that's probably the most unique thing that I've built. But again, not many people need that. But I will say, if I ever am not writing a daily newsletter, which I'm sure at one point I will be, this is probably how I'm going to always consume the news. And I'll just use different sources, of course, because it is just so nice to be able to control the spigot. Instead of having news just coming at you or going on Twitter or somewhere where it's just like you're not really controlling it. I literally I press a button and the news comes in, and I don't, nothing's going to come in while I get done with that. All right, I'm done with that. Next wave. And you can just kind of control how you consume. And I mean, it's why I think the newsletter has so much value, because I'm doing that every day, and then I'm distilling that for my readers, so they're essentially benefiting from that. And it's just a much more organized way to follow sports.
Fantastic. Awesome. We have a question on here that is a great segue to what we're looking to go on.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for self-editing? Any tactics you can use? It can be so hard to see your own blind spots. I know you have a co-pilot that you call, right? Jeff Tracy works with you in Axios Sports, and you have the Axios backing as well as editors. But walk us through how this looked at in sports internet, or even the hustle when there was 5 of you, and perhaps you were only one writing. How did you self-edit, and what advices do you have?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had really here's 3 things during self-editing to always do. I'm trying to even think what do I do all the time. I mean, one thing is, well, as I mentioned before, because Axios is all about efficiency, I almost just when I'm self-editing myself, I'm just looking for anything that just looks too long. And then I'm saying, how can I break that up? And also, again, this is specific to Axios, but there's a lot of times when a big chunk of text actually makes a lot more sense to be as 2 bullets, because maybe it's presenting 2 different sides, and just visually think about, pros, cons. Instead of having 2 sentences next to each other that kind of explain those, just lay it out, pros, cons. People could scan that, okay, pros, cons. So I'm always kind of looking for ways from a format perspective to say, how do I make this chunk of text easier to read, more concise? I mean, I think, again, it depends on what you're doing, because not everybody is going for, I want to have fewer words, I want this more concise. I personally think everybody should be doing that. I just think, it's the reality of the world. People want shorter, people want more efficient. I don't think there's any time when it's a bad idea. And so if you are into that philosophy, I think the thing about self-editing is just getting really comfortable with deleting words. I think one thing that writers struggle with is, well, this took me 30 minutes. And I've gotten to the point now where it's like, yes, but I trust my gut that we don't need it. And I just delete it and don't think twice. That's something that kind of, I think, takes time, because, you don't want to delete your work. You want it to live on, but sometimes you have to. And you just have to be honest with yourself and be really almost your toughest critic. Be like, this is B+. We're looking for A's. and this doesn't add, these 200 words don't add enough to this story to make it worth the time that a reader has to read those 200 words. Get rid of it. I mean, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does make sense, and I'll ask you a follow-up because I know you know, one thing that I've read and seen is you're a lot of like very entrepreneurial. Think about the product, you think about the audience, and one thing that you're always comfortable with is experimenting and measuring the audience interest with different formats. So one way that I would say you self-edit is you ask your audience, is this interesting? What can I do more on it? And then you have that in your background when you're writing it. Am I relaying the message that my audience is interested in? So you're always testing and experimenting. Can you walk us through how you did that? Obviously, when you had Hustle, Sports Internet, and Axios. Just want to get an idea. Is like, there's one thing of editing, like for word count, like, hey, making 1,000 word article 500 and concise, but the other one's like, is this 500 words reaching the right message to the audience that's interested in it? So walk us through those, and if you give examples of those formats and experience that you've done, it'll be helpful for us to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, whether it's an experiment, which is what I would consider kind of a new section that I try out, that kind of makes readers feel like this is fresh. They may, you know, then I'll ask feedback on it. They feel like they're part of the process, which is, and they are. In terms of like, you know, getting feedback, you know, how did I do today, or how are we doing this month? What would you rather see? You know, I've had so many interactions with readers in the past. I do have their voices in my head to a certain extent. So some of the polls we've done, it's funny. Like the most important question I wanted to ask was, if we, because this, you know, decision, I have to make the decision all the time. It's like when it comes down to two stories, one is a story you won't find anywhere else, and one is the most like the most important story, or like a story that is quote unquote important, and you would expect to be in here. What would you rather me choose? And I was hoping readers would, and it was literally 50-50. It was like, great. So it just kind of speaks to the problem, because, but you know, so I guess that is an answer though. It kind of frees us up to be like, well, we just have to make those game time decisions ourselves and trust it. But I think one thing in terms of when I'm thinking about what kind of angle to take for my audience, I think what the value that my newsletter provides is, and the Axios format kind of helps make this happen, is just kind of connecting dots and zooming out or zooming in, or kind of taking what you maybe find somewhere else and doing something a little bit different with it or more with it. So instead of just, this happened last night, you know, we'll do this happened last night, and also this happened last week. Oh, and since both of those happened, maybe there's a trend happening here, or you know, this happened yesterday. You know, what does that mean, or why does that matter, or what's the big picture there? So I think that's just one thing I always keep in mind, is like, because I think it is easy sometimes to fall into a trap of just regurgitating information. And I always try and remember, a lot of my readers are huge sports fans. They probably already heard about this, so we need to add something to it that they won't get anywhere else. Like, a lot of my readers wake up this morning, they knew the Suns won last night. So if I just have a section like the Suns won, like, yeah. But I included a wild stat and got tons of readers replying like, that was the craziest stat. So, you know, I did my job. Like, just forcing yourself to think from the reader's perspective of what do they probably already know, and what can we actually provide value here that isn't just covering our bases essentially. And like, we're a sports newsletter, the Suns won last night, that has to be in there. It's like, yeah, but what can we add to it that people maybe won't find elsewhere? So I think that's kind of how I think about it.
Awesome. No, one way that I would describe kind of like your newsletter and something that's helpful for understanding, it's, for me, it's kind of like the FOMO antidote. Like, you are constantly creating top-notch, caught-up moment email. So if you were busy yesterday, you didn't see what occurred, this Axios Sports Newsletter, like, it's the antidote. You're not going to miss out. This Kendall's going to give you updated on that. And it seems like your North Star here is like, how can you catch up the audience on what occurred and what matters? But can you walk us through, I know you have your audience in mind, and your audience varies from myself, that I'm a huge sports fanatic, to what I would call like a Twitter grandma that's like not super sports fanatic, but they want to keep up with the news. Girlfriends of people that are sports fan. So those are two different points of view. How do you balance that, and how do you make a decision to actively write for both audiences without going into details?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And, the conclusion I've kind of come to there is, because you can't write, you in a way can't write for both audiences. You kind of have to choose. And I think the conclusion I've come to is I'm going to write for you. Maybe not extremely like sports fanatic. I'm going to write for I'm going to say Eli Manning, not former New York Giant quarterback, Eli Manning. That you maybe do if the audience in your mind is somebody who's new to sports, which I have plenty of. And the thinking there is that if I write for the people who are kind of more knowledgeable about this, maybe some of those people who aren't, something goes over their head, but they can just go look it up. And in a way, it makes them feel, it's like aspirational. It makes them feel like they're in a club that they maybe, somehow snuck into, or like now they're in like the society, they shouldn't be in here. Like, they didn't earn their way in here, but like now they are. So now it's like, well, I should, go look that up. And now I'm amongst people who know more than me. I think people would much prefer to read something where it feels like they're getting the smartest take than the opposite, which would be somebody who knows that, Eli Manning, for example, was a former New York Giants quarterback. And then I had to tell them that, and they're like, I know. And it almost seems like you're patronizing them. To a certain extent. I think there's unfortunately a lot of publications that maybe unintentionally kind of do that. And I think it's always better to assume your reader is smart, and also assume your reader isn't going to like care if they have to Google who somebody is because you didn't explain exactly who that person is. And by the way, as with everything I've said, fewer words.
Yeah. This is a great question from what Josh would say. Would you say that the maximum word count for a newsletter varies based on its cadence? For example, daily, weekly, twice a month, monthly newsletter. My understanding, you've been reading a daily newsletter since 2017, which makes it about calculation about 1,300 newsletters in the last 4.5 years.
I haven't done that math. Ooh, wow.
But any thoughts on that if it changes based on the cadence?
Yeah, I think it does. Well, I think it changes cadence, of course. I think it changes format. To me, newsletters, it's such a general term. Newsletter to me is actually a medium. And so what you do there, it's like newsletter website. It's like, well, not every website's the same, every blog's the same, every podcast is the same. It's a canvas upon which you can do whatever you want with. And so, yeah, I think it depends on, I feel like a lot of Substacks now, where I would basically call them blogs, and they just send them they happen to be sent via email, right? There's not much different about a lot of Substacks than, what is on a blog. Whereas my newsletter, for instance, or a lot of other dailies that are kind of news, like it's a very clear cut format. It's 10 specific modules, and just everything about what we do is very much about just short and tight. And so if you're doing one newsletter a week and it's just one really long post, I think you can go super long with that. I think it's just all about experimenting and figuring out. I think, when I started Sports Internet, I probably sent like 20 different formats to my readers in the first 2 months, literally just trying anything that came to mind. Like, do we want to do 10 items a day? Do we want to do 5? Do we want to do in this format? Do we want to do one long post and then just a rundown of links? And I think that's the only way to ensure that you're creating the product that your readers want, is to throw a bunch at them and see what sticks. And I think there's tons of different formats and links that work with newsletters. And to me, newsletters are just sending people your content and not, relying on them or expecting them to find you.
Yeah, and a good way I think would be helpful to understand is you mentioned a lot, like controlling the spigot of information you get through I know you have your RSS feed through the Reader app. You use Notion to plan your day, your week, your calendar on it. We'll go into that daily ready hive afterwards. But one thing that perhaps would be helpful to know is what's a newsletter you open and read immediately, non-Axios newsletter, and what attracts you about that particular newsletter. gives it a better understanding. I assume you don't not only read short, specific Axios newsletter, you may read weekly long ones. And what do you think it's valuable on?
Recently, I actually only have been reading Axios newsletters. I know it's very company man newsletter, company man answer. Like,
Come on.
no, only read Axios. But you know, I mean, there's been plenty of newsletters I've read over the years. I'd say so. One, and this kind of goes to what I was saying in terms of different formats. And Packy McCormick has a newsletter called Not Boring. It's a Substack newsletter.
Mhm.
And that's I think a great example of a different format, which it's just it's a very long, research intensive kind of read, and it's just kind of like one topic a day, or one topic per edition, and it's just a nice change up for me because you know so much of what I am reading is just consuming news. You know, I read some like long form sports stuff, but that's just like every once in a while I enjoy a newsletter that comes to me that I know I'm about to sit down and sink 15 minutes into.
Mhm.
And then it just becomes a matter of, does it come to me at the right time when I have 15 minutes free, which is, of course, the biggest challenge. And that's why dailies are so awesome, by the way. It's one of, like, I don't think people understand this enough. I'm just gonna throw it out there. So what is so powerful about a daily newsletter that is meant to be kind of skimmed or just kind of consumed over breakfast or whatever, or commuting, which maybe people won't do anymore, is that you become a habit, and over time, people have within their own daily routines carved out 10 minutes for you or whatever, 5 minutes, whatever you require, and it just you've won. You've won. Like people that read my newsletter, like they read it at breakfast. Like when they sit down at breakfast, it's like I'm eating and I'm reading this newsletter. So if like I don't show up one day, they're like, "What's going on?" Whereas if you have a newsletter that just kind of sends randomly or even weekly, I don't think people are like waiting for you when they wake up.
Mhm.
And I just think it's so powerful being daily. Maybe one day we'll be 7 days a week, just weekdays now. But I just think it's just so powerful. And combine that with newsletters, like I said, that come to you, it just creates a really unique relationship with the reader.
Yeah, and a follow up on that, like a big part of your newsletters become a habit for the reader. But take us back, like how did how did writing become a daily habit for you? Which is like hard. Like a lot of people are getting it from 0 to 1, and then 1, 1, 1, 1 again, over and over. How did you do that? I know sometimes organizing the information through these, and for those who are aware, we'll share a tweet that Kendall did behind the scenes of this RSS Feed and calendar that helps you organize it. But what overall would be kind of tips to developing a daily writing habit and publishing overall?
You know, I think the reason I was able to sustain it from day one at the Hustle was because I was really passionate about daily newsletters, and they weren't that as popular as they are now. So it was almost like going out every day to kind of prove that like this is a great model. I think that's kind of what drove me. Now it's like I just love sports so much, so I feel like I'm doing my dream job. So it's like fun every day for me, and I think, you know, it would be hard if I was still writing about a topic not sports, I probably would have been burned out by now. It's certainly, you know, most newsletter writers I talk to, like it is a lifestyle when you have to put something out every single day. I think you certainly have to be very disciplined, but at the same time, you know, people always assume that my every day is the same for me because I'm basically doing the same output every day. And my days are actually weirdly like a lot different, which I think is important. I think that would be a mistake that maybe people make when they're trying to write every day, is just having like too much repetition. I know you need to, you know, have somewhat of a routine, but like, you know, you think about people like, and again, maybe this is just me, everybody has different things that work for them, but like, you know, I was just down in Key West recently, toward Ernest Hemingway's house, and they just talk about how like every day he woke up at 5 o'clock and he wrote till noon, and then he put his he stopped. And like maybe that worked for some people, but like I would go insane because I need some change. So I don't know, maybe that's some advice I could give, is like if you want to get into the writing more frequently or on a more consistent basis, it could work for you to say, well, that means every day I'm going to write from this point on. But I think it's more maybe beneficial to think about it from output, and however that output happens, whether it's in one sitting or over a few sittings. Nowadays, we all have phones. Something pops in your head, write it down real quick. I think maybe focusing more on the output and more on what you're creating versus like doing it consistently and repetitively is maybe more beneficial to success.
That makes perfect sense. Now, the last year has been absolutely crazy for everyone, and I can imagine how busy it's been, or interesting it's been for you as a daily newsletter writer in sports business when we had the pandemic at the middle of last year. Walk us through, like, how did you figure out content? You still were producing daily newsletter. There's sometimes there was no sports at all. There was very much. I know we had some Korean baseball, international sports, and all that stuff. But walk us through, how did you pivot, or how did you adapt to pandemic reality of no sports on?
Yeah. I mean, it was wild. Jeff, who is who writes the newsletter with me, he started the day that sports stopped.
Oh my God.
Literally, his first day was like
The Gobert thing.
We were like, yo, first day, and then like 5 minutes later, it's like the NBA season has been called off. March Madness, like, so his first day, we're like, so this will be interesting. But and honestly, that first day, I was like, oh wow, like we might not, like, what are we gonna do? And it's crazy because looking back on it, there were almost never any days when it was like we don't have anything to write about. I think that is a result of we cover all sports. So even when there's not, a ton going on, there's inevitably going to be enough for us to find out and report on. Like I said before, it ended up, one of the things about the pandemic for a sports newsletter is we ended up, and we already did sports business, but we ended up being almost more of a sports business newsletter during that time because so many crazy things were happening in terms of leagues getting shut down, bubbles, all these things that, like, money and the business of sport became actually the story. Like I said, the example I gave before, it's like normally we'd be writing about football or the football season coming up in the summer. But at that point, it was like, well, maybe the football season doesn't happen. And then all of a sudden, the story becomes like, how much money would schools lose, and what would that mean for athletic departments, and how does athletic departments even fund those programs? And that leads us down a whole week's worth of content of that, and ends up being some of my readers' like favorite stories because it was like eye-opening stuff. The other thing I'd say we did was just get really creative with planning ahead. We did, we did like the top 25, or we ranked every NBA team's all-time starting five. We did like the same thing for Major League Baseball. Readers loved that, and that's not something I think I would normally do because we just have so many other things going on. So it was kind of like we had some sections to work with. We got creative, and I think it ended up being some of our best work, which I'm really proud of because, like I said, there was a point where it was like we might, like, are we even going to be able to put this thing out? And we never struggled. So I don't know how to like package that other than just like we got creative, and the sports always delivers. I guess if you have a general enough area that you're covering, you'll find something. If I was like an NBA newsletter or Major League Baseball newsletter and literally there was no baseball, then I would have probably had to shut down.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to understand. I'll roll into the most recent question and bringing it up to here. They're curious to know about your daily workflow process and writing the newsletter. I shared in the chat a couple of things that are useful to know. One is a tweet that Kendall shared up behind the scenes, that has a screenshot of your Reader app and then your Notion calendar, and then another Notion post that you did with them to walk them through how that is. So outside of that, walk us through that process, kind of like verbalize that tweet, and what else do you do on it? I would assume during the pandemic that RSS feed was still full, so it still had content coming through.
Yeah.
So
well, during the pandemic, the RSS feed was full. The biggest difference was there weren't as many games at night. I think that's the one thing that's unique about a sports daily newsletter. Like a lot of my coworkers, let's say, are markets reporter, the market closes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some things happen at night. For the most part, though, it's like, all right, the news is kind of done. I'm therefore kind of done.
Yeah.
With sports, it's like, it's 4 o'clock right now. We already have a lot of stories for tomorrow, but it's like there's an NBA game tonight. Who knows what happens. So as a result, my day has to be flexible. And it's not like people ask me all the time, it's like, how many hours a day do you spend on the newsletter? I have absolutely no idea. because I'm not really viewing it that way. I don't like sit down, work, stop. I'm almost always working, but in a sense, I'm also always able to stop working and go play basketball or grab food or what, it's, so I think I would describe my process as work intensive, but flexible, as a necessity, because I'm so much responding to what's happening, and sports has the weirdest news cycle of anything, because it's almost 24/7. But like generally speaking, like our workflow, Jeff and I, who write the newsletter together, we usually, to start, I'll kind of walk through the day at around 10 o'clock in the morning, we meet virtually, sometimes
Eastern.
in person. Eastern, 10 o'clock Eastern, we meet and we kind of go over the day, what we have so far. Usually at that time, there's a few stories, right? Maybe there's a story we've already been working on that's more evergreen. Like tomorrow's top story, the Stanley Cup final is headed back to Montreal. So we're doing like a little story about just like his sports history of Montreal, kind of taking people on a little field trip to Montreal because we know we can go up there for the game. So that's something that we were already able to start working on because we knew it was going to be Friday. So, we connect this morning. How's that looking? Where are we at on that? So we meet in the morning, kind of, assign stuff, get a feel for where we're at, split off, go get some of that stuff done. And then we circle back again early afternoon. At that point, more things have happened. And then, so it's almost like a few checkpoints during the day where we just kind of come together, check on how things are going, see what was happened since the last time we talked, decide, all right, well, that happened. So that story from before is probably getting bumped to next week, or maybe just eliminate it altogether. Let's replace with this. We have our illustrators and our data visual folks who, when we have a request, we just kind of ping them, send that over. So yeah, I guess I'd describe it as day starts at 10, multiple check-ins throughout the day. And then Jeff's usually ends his day around 7, 8. Sometimes though, like last night, didn't end until 11:30 because he was writing about the College World Series. And I'll end my day a few hours after that. And then I wake back up at 5:30-ish. Depends on how much we have left. And that's just to check, did I miss anything overnight? And maybe I'll save one story for the morning to just kind of crank out, or like the trivia question sometimes isn't done. So when I wake up in the morning, I think of that. So yeah, it's like, it's like I said, it's a lot. It's long days that aren't really like, it's clearly not a 9 to 5. But I really think the flexibility is like invaluable. And I don't know how I would ever have a more structured job, because I love the fact that I can do something like this. This is no problem. I can do this during the middle of the day. I can go, if I'm just like, I want to get outside, just go play basketball anytime. So it's, yeah.
One thing that I would say that makes it easier for you than you perhaps may understand looking from the outside in is you have a clear format of what you're looking to do. So for example, the news that you have the one big thing that's always going to be on there. You have
Right.
a trivia that you're going to create. You have the Ocho, which is you can talk more about the Ocho. You have segments and so that structure, how you're filling in those gaps every day. So it's not like I need to come up with 10 different ideas. It's like one idea for this particular box.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a nice balance of like, we have to fill, empty sections, but at the same time, we also know number 8 every day is going to be on this day, so we can plan ahead with that. We, every Monday's top plays of the weekend, we can play, like, so there's enough that we can plan ahead with, that it is a nice balance, to your point, of like evergreen stuff or almost like filling in the slots versus like coming up with something, out of the blue.
Yeah. So a lot of it's like the way they'll look at it, and admire what you do is that you, for lack of a better term, productize it, where you're already like, you have your reader app, you have your calendar that helps you sort that information. Then you have to take that information, put it into a format that you've tested, experimented, connects with the audience. So that's like 90% of the way. All you have to do is like write some, I guess you don't know what's on there. All is a very nice way to say it. That's a lot of work still to do. But there's a system that you have in place that helps you fill in this, where you're not afraid of a blank page every day. Although I've heard you say, mentioned before, that one of the things you love about newsletters, you get to be like a daily entrepreneur. You get to write something every single day about a blank page.
Yeah.
Can you go a little bit more your motivation, or how like a blank page gets you motivated every day? and
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you did your homework, man. This is great. I love this. This is like the best interview because people like don't usually ask questions, but this is awesome. Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly how I feel because I have always been, very entrepreneurial. And so when I started like sports internet, it was like half of me was like, a media startup founder. Half of me was like a sports writer. And I just kind of over that time, realized that I really, as much as I enjoy the kind of the founding the business aspects, doing all this kind of startup-y, scrappy stuff, I had the most joy out of the writing. And I was able to find enough of that entrepreneurial stuff in the writing when it's a newsletter that it kind of checked off both boxes for me. So I do describe to people as, when you have a daily newsletter product, you almost have your own little media publication that you're in charge of. And it is to a certain extent blank every day. And you have to just like fill it in. And that to me is almost building something every day. I'm building something. I'm not just writing, I'm building something that I view as almost, I don't want to sound too corny, but it's like a piece of art to me every day. It's like, how do we just make everything as efficient as it can be? How can we make it flow? And every day that's a new challenge. And, I'm able to get that entrepreneurial energy out in doing that.
Awesome. This is great. Now you got a lot of feedback and tips about writing, about organizing, planning ahead, and being motivated on it. I want to get into a little bit of the business aspect of this because I think it's where you provide maximum value because you're able to have a clear understanding what you wanted to do. As people would say today, you're in Axios because you meant to be there. You shot your shot. You say, when you were starting your newsletter, you said, I want to be the Axios of sports. That's even before you came there. That was 2 years before, and you wanted to have that clarity, and you became part of it. Can you walk us through like what got you motivated to be clear what you wanted to do? But second, how did you build your audience, what your North Metric Star was, and how did you expand? I know it's a little bit different than most newsletter writers are, so I wanted you to share with the audience.
So I think what set me off on the journey to do it was, because I was at the Hustle all the time. I was writing that newsletter that really opened my eyes to the daily newsletter model. But there were, the Hustle had competition. There were plenty of newsletters kind of covering business, tech. There's a lot of politics newsletters. But there literally was no sports newsletter. I mean, there were maybe two, but they were not good. And I just couldn't believe that there wasn't like a plus sports daily newsletter that was in my mind like Sports Center in an email. And so I had that realization of like, well, I'm doing this for this topic. I could easily figure out how to do this for sports. That was also the first time in my life that I wasn't either in high school or younger and following sports, college following sports. It was the first time in my life that I wasn't following sports or working in sports. And it was the first time in my life when I was like, oh my gosh, it's like kind of hard to follow sports when you're an adult and you don't work in sports. It's like, when do you watch? Like, and I talked to all my friends, like, do you guys watch sports anymore? They're like, no. I was like, do you like wish you did? Like, kind of don't have the time. Like, well, if I like kind of package that information in a newsletter, would you read it on the way to work? They're like, yes. And that was literally like the last conversation. I was like, all right, I'm going to go do it. So that is how I got the idea of just like, I felt I could use it. And I confirmed with my friends they could use it, and it just kind of caught on. In terms of growth, so early on I realized, so like I was originally, thinking I'm going to build a media business. We're going to hit certain metrics, hit certain goals. I'm going to raise some money. I'm going to hire some people. Like I had this kind of long-term vision. Within the first few months, though, I already started to get enough interest from other publications. And as I said, kind of fell in love so much with the writing process that it seemed to me that my exit was going to be getting my newsletter acquired or an acqui-hire, so I could, do this for someone else and not have to worry about all this other stuff. And so once that kind of became clear to me, I realized that in any negotiation of like an acquisition, I'd much rather have a store be selling a story than a number. I thought that if I said if what they're acquiring was X number of emails, then that's a math equation. Well, we're buying your list, and you have this many people on your list, so this is how much you're worth. I figured it would be I'd have a much stronger case if I was able to tell a story and say, well, you're not just acquiring X number of readers. I have a 60% open rate, which I did. People are obsessed with this. Like you're buying a community. And so
let's pause there on the 60%. Just for context, I think that the average is about 18 to 20% open rate on a newsletter. So 60 is like exorbitant. I'm not sure if you're still keeping that at Axios. I know you have that in Sports Internet.
We've grown so much that it's almost impossible. We're still really high. 40s, somewhere in the 40s.
Insane.
Yeah, but so that made, obviously I wanted to grow the list, but I was really focused on open rate, and that I think that helped me not make stupid decisions like buying. People like buy lists. People do weird like giveaways to get like emails quickly, but then those emails don't end up being engaged because they didn't sign up to read your newsletter. They signed up to try and win a free trip to Florida, and then they haven't subscribed. So I really was focused on open rate, and that was kind of my North Star. At the same time, to grow, because you do have to grow, the most successful thing, the most impactful thing I did was cross promotions with other newsletters, which I've said to everybody whenever they ask me about what's the best way to grow a newsletter. Particularly now when there's so many, I would say that is because, so I did two things. One, I tried cross promotions with sports Instagram accounts, sports Twitter, like sports, like within the sports vertical, but other mediums. Not nearly as effective as newsletter subscribers of non-sports publications, which to me, my conclusion there was the newsletter reader, quote, newsletter reader is a demographic, or is that is a type of person. People
you targeted two audiences. You have your sports newsletter. You were like, let me target newsletter, and then the sports people, and you try to figure out where.
And the newsletter people were and to me, what I realized was, well, that makes total sense, because if somebody already reads newsletters, that means, and to use a metaphorical term, they already get the newspaper. Now, if you say, do you want to also read a sports newsletter? You're saying to them, do you want to add a sports page to the newspaper that already shows up on your driver every morning? It's like, yeah, I'll try it out. Whereas people who don't read newsletters but are interested in sports, you're actually asking them to get a newspaper subscription, and they don't currently get the newspaper. So you're trying to introduce to them a new way of consuming news. Whereas the other people, you're just trying to give them more news to consume in a way they already do. And that was a really interesting finding of mine that I don't think I would have guessed originally. I would have thought, if I get myself in front of sports fans, they want more sports information, but it ended up being readers of business newsletters wanted to try out a sports newsletter. So really interesting. I still think it's so fascinating. And I tell people that all the time. When you're thinking about cross promotion for a newsletter or whatever you're doing, whatever medium you are doing, think about people who consume that medium, regardless of what they're consuming on that medium, more than people who are interested in that topic.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing that actually you mentioned on Twitter, a lot of it is like the ease of signing up. It's a big thing. So if you're a newsletter writer, you add your email, this is how it is. You want to make it as easy as possible. One use case was, I think Twitter recently launched a new Spaces format, and there was a double opt-in. You're completely against the opt-in, just make it once, come in. So you're promoting an Instagram and Twitter to them to sign up. It's a lot of steps. You want to optimize it for like one-click go, like one-click purchase in Amazon.
I mean, email's tough. That email, there are so many things about it that it is hard. It's not intuitive, right? You can't tag your friend and then your friend clicks a button and now they're following that account. They have to click a button, go to a landing page, enter their email. A lot of younger people don't even know their friend's email, so they can't forward it. There are a lot of challenges, so you really do have to, any way you can, figure out how to make everything as easy as possible, even though it's still kind of hard. And I think referral programs are a great way to do that. Because there's people who read my newsletter who've never been to, I mean, there are plenty that have, but some have never been to the Axios website, right? I mean, they just get the newsletter. That's their relationship with Axios, is the newsletter. And so when they are out with their friends, they're like, talking about the newsletter, like, their friends are like, oh, I want to subscribe. How do I subscribe? Sometimes the reader's like, I actually don't know. Because they're not seeing that. So what's great about a referral program is you have that kind of in there frequently enough that they remember, oh yeah, I always see that at the top, or I always see that at the bottom. that link, so you have to just like get it into people's heads over and over that they know where to tell their friends to go, or they know how to refer friends. Newsletter life, man.
So what it sounds like on here is like you want to make it as simple as possible for people to sign on. You want to target the audience that is on that same medium first, and you can expand with with other audiences, but that's where you're going to get the engagement.
I think so. I mean, I think there's some exceptions there.
Yeah.
Like I don't think, business and sports, I think, are close enough, and there's enough crossover there. But like if I was writing about something super niche, maybe then the rule I'm saying of look for people on the medium, or maybe that doesn't apply as much.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if the topic's close enough, politics, there's plenty of people, like most people are interested in like the same stuff. I mean, people have like specific interests, but like most people read the front page of the newspaper, and then there's a sports section, business, the general stuff. If you're a generalist like that, I think you can hit pretty much any large swath of people, and that you'll get some interest.
Great. I know you're getting to time, so I'll just go to a couple of last questions on here. We'll make it a little bit sports related. One is, let me see. How'd you come up with the idea of the Ocho, which is one of the items on there? For those who are not familiar, but perhaps you can explain it better to the wider audience.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, if you can, your favorite sport event that you've attended so far, and one you wish to attend. I think I know which ones you wish to attend, but we'll confirm. But these are like a couple questions to put up.
Yeah. So the Ocho I got from the movie Dodgeball.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in the movie, like the dodgeball tournaments on ESPN, the Ocho. It's, Channel for Alternative Sports. ESPN has since kind of really leaned into that. They now have
August 8th.
August 8th every year. So that was the idea, and but it was like when I started numbering the sections, I think it was like the first day, or maybe it was like the first. I just know really early on. I just happened to be like, I still remember that day. I was like writing the numbers, and I got to 8. And I also happened to have just seen some weird sport, and I was like, wait, 8, Ocho. Oh. And it was just like light bulb moment. It was like perfect. So that's kind of how that happened. And then sporting event, best sporting event I've attended. Well, this is a cool story. So literally like the reason, maybe I should have had this at the top about my writing career, but literally the reason I became a sports writer, and therefore the reason why everything else has happened, is because at the last minute, like a year out of college, living in New York, I was working at Bleacher Report at the time, so I was in the business, but I was kind of getting like, do I really want to do this? I don't know. Last minute, my friends and I decided to go to a Knicks game. The Knicks were playing the Bobcats at the time. Random game, no significance. Ended up being, Carmelo Anthony ended up scoring 64 points. It's like the most or second most in Madison Square Garden history. It was just like an unreal experience. Fans were going nuts. I was with my best friends. It was just kind of a surreal night that we kind of, it was just serendipitous. And it just reminded me how much I love sports. And it was just like I literally left the game and I just went home and I started writing. And let, in a way, the rest is history. So I'd have to say that's the best sporting event I've been to, because it literally like changed my life. So shout out Carmelo Anthony.
Yeah.
What
I had this year on the Carmelo story to ask you about it.
Yeah, no, it's I owe him everything, I guess. And then event I'd like to go to is probably World Cup. Although watching Euros this year, I feel like that might be, I don't know if it's above it just because it's not quite as significant, but I do think the idea of if I can ever make this happen, Euros, the fact that the games are all over the place, you could kind of organize an awesome like 3-week trip where you maybe see 3-4 different cities, whereas World Cup's obviously in one place. So probably one of those two events. I just think global soccer, international soccer is just the best.
Awesome. I had Masters as your potential place to go. But
that's hard to.
I'm a massive soccer fan.
Yeah, Masters is definitely up there.
Alrighty. Well, we'll just end on here with a couple of recommendations. So I know you mentioned that currently you're only reading Axios newsletter. So if you have another newsletter you want to recommend, that's
not boring. Not boring.
Yeah, not boring. Okay. Any app, podcast, or article that would recommend, and then
Any easy app for like content wise or no?
So for context on here, like for example, I know you're ahead of the curve when it came to Locker Room before we got bought by Spotify and Green Room. For those that are aware, Locker Room is kind of like the Clubhouse for sports. A better way to explain it. But is there any something you recommend to the audience? If there's app, podcast, newsletter, article, it could be one of each. One, not one of each. Isn't that sense?
I'm trying to think. I'm pretty simplistic iPhone guy. I'm really minimalist in terms of the apps I use. I mean, I've said it, if I could recommend an app, it's Reader.
Reader, okay.
My RSS. I mean, you got to customize it. It takes a little bit of work. I'm telling you, if anybody switches to consuming information via RSS and it doesn't change your life, I'll pay you. I'll Venmo you $20 because it will. It changes your life.
You use Reader with Pocket at the same time?
Oh, Pocket too. Yeah, Pocket's great. Pocket is one of those things. It's like it requires a behavioral change. I think, I don't know if you guys use that, but like once you get into the mindset of anytime you see something even remotely interesting that you think there's even a 1% chance that you might want later, just pocket it. And then you'll be surprised, like 4 months later, you'll remember that thing. And instead of having to remember what that thing was, you're like, well, I pocketed it. Go get it. Like it changes your life when you get to the point of like, anytime you see something, you just pocket it and you just know where it is forever. It's great.
Awesome. I want to share with people where they can reach you or where to sign up.
Yeah, so you just follow me on Twitter at the Kendall Baker, and then sign up for the newsletter. Super easy. It's sports.axios.com, and you'll get it first thing tomorrow morning.
Actually, last question. I had it on here. It was super curious. How did you come up with your sign-up signature? And for those that are aware, Kendall sign up is all emails with a different nickname. For example, today was Kendall give Reggie its Heisman back, referring to Reggie Bush. Baker. 2 days ago was like Kendall bring back Screwball, and you even can't think of a nickname, Baker, which is
that was a little inside joke.
Walk us through how you create that sign-up signature. It's a different one. And what is tomorrow's, if you want to share that?
Well, it's so the secret is that I don't do. It's the last thing I do. Maybe it's a handful of times when I know it's, but like it's usually like the way I look at it is, it's a way for me to take what I just wrote and kind of break the third wall and comment on what I just wrote for you as you're leaving. So it's a little bit of that. It's like me kind of my commentary on myself, or my commentary on what you just read, or maybe it's a joke from above. It's some, I call it like an Easter egg. I mean, there's plenty of people who like say that's their favorite thing in the newsletter. It gets them to the bottom, so it's like an awesome thing. It started though at the Hustle, and I don't remember exactly why or how, but I started doing it there. We also had every day I had my name and a nickname, and then we had a third like employee that was inspired by Car Talk, and it was like it would be a first and last name that when you read it combined, it was like some funny word. So I don't remember exactly like why the nickname started, but it was part of an overall sense of like, let's add a little personality at the bottom. And it's a nice little Easter egg, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. We'll end it up there. No nickname given for this one, but we'll look at it tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time. And
of course, yeah, this is great.
Have a good one.
You too. See ya.